and financial freedoms that's going to change their lives. So for that, we have so far built an amazing a community of people like yourselves, and with help of our partner, Georgia Tech's AI for Advances in Optimization, who is kindly leading the series of workshops for us, and with help like very brilliant people and organizations, we're able to do what we're doing right now. We're working in 6 countries at the moment, and not only just doing AI and data science training, but also leadership development. So this is an amazing opportunity for all of you and all of us to be able to work with you. And from now on, we hope to have this as a community that will move forward with many different things we have planned for the rest of this year and 2025. So hope you enjoy our programs. This is meant for the beginners and intermediate, also for professionals who are already in the fields. So it's for all of you. You will get something. There is something for everyone, and hopefully you'll find value and continue to be with us. With that, I will introduce you to our country leaders in Syria, in Egypt, and in Bangladesh. They will say a few words, and then you're going to have your wonderful, wonderful, and brilliant expert, Dr. Rabab Haider, to present the workshop to you. And thank you. Hope to see you soon. So we're going to go with Ranya right now.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yes? Okay. So I'm delighted to be here today. My name is Ranya Amer. I'm a country director of HerWILL Egypt. I'm so glad because we just recently established HerWILL in Egypt. So I'm so happy to join this big community that will be bigger with you, of course. We hope to provide you with all that you need in STEM and technology and leadership. So we are here with you and for you. Please enjoy your time, and your feedback I will most welcome by the end of the workshop time, because we need to hear your feedback and then to progress for other more workshops and training. Thank you for being here. Enjoy your time. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, Farhana, if you're speaking, you're on mute. So.
Hi, Patty. Would you kindly unmute Carol Zakhour?
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for this introduction. And okay, I'm gonna now talk to the Syrians who are attending this session in Arabic. أهلا وسهلا فيكم جميعا، ممنونين كتير لتفهمكم للمشاكل شوي صارت معنا بسبب اللخبطة بالتايم زون. حابة أخبركم إنه هاي رح تكون أول جلسة من جلساتنا مشان هذا البروجرام، وما رح تكون النهاية. حتى بعد نهاية البروجرام نحن رح نتابع معكم مشان أنتم تقدروا تستفيدوا وتطوروا حالكم بالستم اللي نحن كتير بحاجته ببلدنا، وتقدروا أنتم تلاقوا فرص عمل مع الشركات، هي سواء كانت يعني ريموتلي أو تصح لكم فرص سفر لاحقا. بتمنى منكم إنه أنتم تشاركوا قدر المستطاع، خاصة إنه أنتم هلأ ما عم تمثلوا حالكم بس، عم تمثلوا سوريا، بما انه هي يعني اول مره سوريا بتكون مشاركه. فبتمنى يعني نكون نحن فعالين ونلتزم الاداب الحديث مثل ما انتم دائما بتشاركوا معنا بالمبادره. وفي حال عندكم اي استفسار نحن موجودين للاجابه، واهلا وسهلا فيكم جميعا.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. So can everyone hear me? Just give me a thumbs up on screen, then I will know. Okay, so hi everyone, this is Tahiya. I am the country manager at HerWILL Bangladesh. So I have the whole team of HerWILL Bangladesh with me today, and we are very excited to kick off our HerWILL AI for Equality Datathon and workshops. This is the first workshop that we're doing, and I would like to apologize to everyone because of the delay of the workshop that we were supposed to start a week ahead, but then we had to reschedule and we had to, postpone it, because if you look around, you will see the diverse group of people that are here, and we wanted to accommodate every one of you so that you guys can actually participate in these workshops and actually learn and eventually end up participating in the datathon as well. So as we all of us are here, what I want to acknowledge is that thank you for understanding the difference in the time zone and being patient and patiently waiting in the waiting room and then joining and participating. And thank you to those participants who have kept their videos on, because it falls under our rules, and I see that you all are following that. Having said that, I would like to remind all of you that for the next 90 minutes or a little bit more than 90 minutes, we will be having a very thorough workshop on Python Essentials. And this wonderful workshop will be taken by our instructor, Dr. Rabab Haider. And she is the assistant professor at the University of Michigan and a postdoc fellow at Georgia Tech and an energy fellow at MIT. So you guys realize how much of an expert is among us today to guide you through learning Python essentials. Now, regarding the rules, what I really want everyone to follow is, number one, that all of us are here from different countries. So let's be respectful towards each other. If we have any kind of questions, any kind of queries, we can raise our hand and our instructor and our team will guide you with your questions and queries. If you see that the workshop is going on and everybody is full on in the working mode and still you have a question, you can put your question in the comment box and we will help you out. After 45 minutes of the session, you will receive an attendance / feedback form. Please note that you will have to fill out that attendance / feedback form. If you do not fill out that form, we will not be able to get your attendance, and hence we will not be able to provide you certification after the completion of the workshop series. So please be very mindful about fill out the forms that we share. Keep an eye on the chat section. Whatever the discussion is going on, it is going to be extremely helpful for your learning. Please be on camera. If you don't have any valid reason of not being on camera, then please be on camera, because that is something which we really take very seriously. And yes, that's all. Now I would like to hand over the floor to our wonderful instructor, Dr. Rabab Haider.
Hi, everyone. Are you able to hear me? Quick thumbs up if you are able to hear me okay.
Patty, can you kindly unmute
Great.
Dr. Rabab?
Thank you. You should be able to hear me now. Thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you for inviting me to support all of the work that HerWILL is doing, and for being able to have the opportunity to talk to all of you from around the world, and all of the countries that you are coming from. Thank you again for tuning in across the different time zones, and I understand how difficult that can sometimes be, but we're grateful for that you're here to join us. And in the interest of time, I'm going to get started right away. So I'm going to do a couple of things first as we kind of get set up. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So you should be able to see what is a Google Doc page right now. And this is just a quick welcome to everyone who's joining us, and some community classroom guidelines, which the HerWILL team has already explained already, but I want to just add a couple of things. So as you all know, we have so many participants. We're over 300 participants in this workshop. So please do keep your microphone muted so that we can minimize any audio disruptions. Please also don't draw or annotate on the screen if possible. Thank you. If you do have questions, can someone from the HerWILL team kind of figure out what's happening with the screen annotations to keep those from happening? From that particular participant. Thank you. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Given the large number of people, we won't be able to, I won't be able to actually monitor hands that are going up or the chat itself. And given that it's already 11:30, this will be about 60 minutes of a workshop. I'm going to wait until we can sort out what's happening with the screen before moving forward. But please, all of our participants, please remain respectful of the time that we are all putting in. If you have questions, we can pop them in the chat, and please limit that to needing guidance or asking for extra support. That way we don't have too much happening in the chat that is difficult to find who needs some questions answered, and we can support those people. So this is an introduction to Python session, and many of the registered participants indicated that they have limited or prior experience with coding, and so that's exactly what today's workshop is designed for. If you already have prior experience, if you've done some work in any of the previous, in any prior language, so Python, Java, Julia, even front-end coding, a lot of what you're going to see in today's content will likely be things that you've already experienced and worked with. You're more than welcome to stay with us, so we're happy to have all of you with us here today. And you could even answer some questions that your peers put in the chat, and always be respectful of that. So thank you so much for the HerWILL team for your ongoing support. And with that, I want to let us get started right away. So all of you should have access to the AI for Equality classroom, I'm guessing, and this is where the material that you have for the workshop will be. This is the instructor view, so your view might look a little bit different, but under your classwork, you're going to see Workshop 1, Python Essentials. And this is where all of the material that I will be talking through today is located. So the first thing I'm going to go over is this PDF file, and then we're going to jump right into that Jupyter notebook. And I'll explain what that is as well. So this is the PDF file that you have on your classroom materials. It's just a quick introduction to the Google Collaboratory environment that we will be using. You can go ahead and read this later in your own time, as well as these are links so you can read a little bit more about Collaboratory and Python as well. So Colab is a really great environment because you don't have to do any setup on your own computer. Rather, you can leverage the environment that's already existing. It runs everything on the cloud, so it's not using your own local resources. And that way you can run jobs, for example, GPU jobs, if you're doing heavy machine learning processes. It's also a really good tool because it allows you to really quickly run certain sections of code. You can visualize things, and there are some really neat features that I'm going to show you today that helps you in how you're developing your code. So we're going to be using Python, and Python's a really great language for beginners as well as for seasoned programmers, and it's very versatile. So you can do everything from writing really short scripts that you execute once, for example, if you want to clean some data. And it's also really good for writing full software packages that you can then, for example, disseminate to the global software community through GitHub. And so if you've used any of these packages in the past, you might know that Python has a really rich set of packages and a really great global community that works on developing these resources. And so any kind of tool that you're looking for, there might be a package that exists out there to help support you. So we're going to be starting with Python. And this is just a quick reminder of what the schedule looks like. And we're in that first workshop looking at Python essentials. Okay, so this is a file that's going to help you get set up. And so if you could go ahead and follow these instructions, you're going to go to that Colab webpage. So if you click that link in your PDF document, please go ahead and sign into your Google account. If you don't already have a Google account, you'll have to create one. And that's going to allow you to use Colab. It's going to allow you to leverage all of the resources that Colab has in their environment. And it's going to allow you to leverage the workbooks that we're creating through this workshop series. So I'm going to give you just a minute or two to go ahead and go to that link. I'll also drop it into the chat in case there's any difficulties in accessing the PDF document. Oh, thank you for the folks who are adding the information to the chat. I appreciate that for the classroom. So if you can go ahead onto that Colab link, you can sign in. So there'll be a little sign in button up top here. You can sign in with your Google account, and then, or you can create an account, and it should allow you to spin up on Colab right away. So once you are in Colab, you're going to be able to do a couple of different things. And one of the things you're going to do is you're going to be able to either open an existing Jupyter notebook that you already have. You can create a new notebook, or you can upload a notebook that you have on your computer. Most likely, you're going to be either opening a notebook that you have from your drive or uploading the notebook that we've shared in the classroom materials. So if you go to your Google Classroom under the classwork, you'll see that material that I showed you earlier. And that binary file that's listed here is actually a Jupyter notebook. And that's what we're going to be working with. So if you go ahead and either download that or save that to your Google Drive, the screen that you see might look something like this, where you download it directly to your computer. If you do that, you'll have to upload it to Google Colab, or you can perhaps be able to open it directly with Google Colab as a file that's on your drive. If you are downloading it to your own computer, then what you're going to want to do is actually come back to that Google Colab page. And then when you go click File, you can click Upload Notebook. And that's going to allow you to upload something that you have on your own computer. I'll give just a couple of minutes to make sure everyone has enough time to set that up. And please reference that PDF if you need to see those steps again. And once you have that set up and going, we'll get started on the actual workshop. So today's workshop is going to be entirely on this workbook. And you will have your own version of this workbook. There'll be places that you can fill in the different material. And we'll go through all of this through the entire process. As everyone's getting set up on their side, I'm just going to give a little bit of background information, and then we can get started on the material. So there's a couple of different things you can do with Colab. One of the things that's really nice is it sets up this really nice table of contents for this file. So you'll see that we're going to have 3 different parts. The first is an introduction to Python basics. The second is a very brief introduction to visualization. So if you have data, then how do you actually take a look at what that data looks like? And then we'll introduce a library called scikit-learn, and that's used frequently for AI and ML applications. So we're just going to look at that very briefly. And given the duration of today's workshop, we won't be going into detail on those, but the subsequent workshops in this series will take you through some examples on how to do things like text processing and working with AI and ML. So the table of contents allows you to see these different things. suppose I'm right at the beginning of the workbook, but I want to go straight to part two. If you click part two, you'll come right here. And you'll be able to see it. So it's a table of contents that also hyperlinks to where each of the places in your notebook are. There are a couple of other features, so you can do similar things that you would on any other Google Doc or even a Word file. And you're going to see some of these different things here. So you can insert different pieces of code or text. You can run all of the cells or certain cells as well. And then you can look at different settings that are in your notebook too. So one of the things that I've done here in our workbook is essentially to write out more detailed instructions. So if for any reason you aren't able to stay for the entire duration of the workshop, or if we aren't able to get through all of the sections because of time, I know someone earlier had mentioned that they had some internet issues, any of those things, I've done what I could to add in a lot of detail in text so that you're able to follow along through the workbook, even if you get disconnected. And hopefully that provides a little bit of support. So I'm just going to quickly check the chat to see if there's anything that anyone needs. So thank you for sharing that workbook into the document. Okay.
Hold on.
Is everything okay on for the HerWILL team? Could you just let me know if everything looks okay and we can keep moving forward, or should I wait a little bit longer for folks to get set up on the Jupyter Notebook? Okay, I will take the silence as a we can move forward sign. So hopefully everyone has their Jupyter Notebook up and running. And if you don't, that's okay. You can keep working through those steps that are in that PDF and in the classroom as well.
Rabab, I'm so sorry. We were
Mhm.
having trouble unmuting ourselves, so couldn't answer your question. Yes, everything looks great, but if you would please do me a favor, walk through the annotation off. It seems that the speaker who's sharing the screen is the only one who can turn it off. So let's give the
Sure.
floor to Yasmina, who can walk you through this. Yasmina, are you there? I think she's having Patty. Unmute Yasmina, please.
She is unmuted.
Okay. Okay. Meanwhile, while she's getting ready, Rabab, if you would go into mute and more on the right bottom side corner.
Yep.
And see if there is annotation.
Okay. I was able to disable the annotation for everyone. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yep.
Yeah, thank you for your support.
Yes, of course. No, we're having this muting, unmuting issue right now, but we'll get over it. And yeah, everything looks perfect. Thank you.
Great. So we'll keep moving forward with the Jupyter Notebook. In the very beginning, what I want to show you is just how this notebook is structured. So as I mentioned, there are cells, and each cell is a certain component. So as you can see here, this is a particular cell that I added an image, I added some text, and then you can add a hyperlink, and this is what it'll render and look like. So when I click out of that cell, that's what you see as the very first cell in your notebook. You can have both text cells as well as these code cells. And what this is really good for is it means you can run sections of code at a certain time, and you can also add text. So for example, it's really nice to design a workshop because now you have kind of this tutorial content. We can design this into different parts. And so if we expand this first part, you'll see that we can use different annotations that exist within the Colab environment to create this title. And then I can add in text that supports you throughout this entire workbook. And so this is the description of what we're going to do. And then you'll see here in this gray box and with this little run sign, that's the code. So this is actually the code that I've written in Python. And we're going to walk through each of these cells as we go through. And basically, when you want to actually run that piece of code, you click that little, that little run button. It's going to run, and that's the dashed line shows you that it's running. You can see that it was initializing the Python environment. It was running the code, and then that has been executed and completed. So you'll see that little green check mark here that shows that your code has run, and it'll give you the time. For something this small, it'll be a really short amount of time, but for larger pieces of code, if you have for loops, which we will talk about in the workshop, it'll show you how long it took to execute that piece of code. So the first thing that we've done right here is we've initialized a variable. The variable is called num, and we've basically assigned it a value of 1. So in the future, in my code, I could do something like, let's say we assign another variable, num2, and I want it to be the number 1 plus 5, right? So if we do this, we now have another variable that's using a previous variable that we've assigned. In our case, we're doing some mathematical operation. And if we wanted to look at the value of that variable, we could do that with something called a print statement. And the print statement is basically going to display the information that we want to the user. In our case, I have a certain description written in English. And so I'm going to change this to this is the variable I want to print out. And then this is the actual variable that you have in your code. So this is num2. So now if we run this code block, we're going to see that num2 has a value assigned of 6, which is num is equal to 1 plus 5. It gives you 6. And so in this way, you're seeing on the left-hand side of our statements, you have the variable names that you're working with. And then the right-hand side is going to be whatever functionality that you have. It could be something like here we have a mathematical operation, or it could be calling a function from a package. And we'll see an example of that in the future as well. So this is kind of the most basic thing where you can assign variables with values and use those variables later in your code. Print statements can be really nice to monitor what's happening in your code. And you can use those kind of throughout the work that you're doing. So another element that I want to introduce very briefly is data types. So here we have a variable that we've assigned with this value 1, and all of us kind of think, okay, this is a mathematical number. It could be something like an integer or a decimal value. And so in programming, what we have initialized here, this is a type called an int or an integer. And there are some other types that we'll talk about as well. So we can have strings, which, for example, I've shown here, this is a string, and it's enclosed within these double quotation marks. You have different numeric types. If you have a decimal, it would be a float type as opposed to an integer. And you can have different things that include Booleans, which are yes, no, true, false, 0, 1 variables. So if we want to see what the type of that variable is, here I've done it for the variable num. And if we similarly look at for num2, which is a variable that we assigned earlier, we run that script and it tells us that the type of that variable is int. So we have an integer variable. Now, we've given an example here where we've used the variable that we've assigned in another statement to assign another value. And we can look at that a little bit closer. I've actually done the same example in the code as before, so it's plus 5. In this case, we're assigning it to another variable. Suppose we want to make this more complicated. So suppose it's num plus 3, and we want to multiply all of this by 2, right? So if we run this block of code, you're going to see that that now reflects num. The value of num was 1. Num plus 3 is 4, times 2 is 8. So in your own workbooks, you can actually go in and play around with some of these just to get a sense of how the syntax is working. And the syntax is how these statements are written. You can have these different print statements that are showing you the values of things as well. So when we actually use this variable num in these different equations, we're not changing the variable of num. We're using it, but we're not changing it. And so this is the piece that I've written right here. And if we look at the value of the variable, it's still going to be the same. So the variable still has the same value as before of 1, which we initialized. If we wanted to look at the value of another variable, so in Google Colab, we can say insert a code cell, and a code cell has been added below the statement I had before. So if we want to look at the variable x, and this is very similar to what we printed above, we can print as follows. The variable x has a value 8. And so this is something that has been assigned, and we can use it in subsequent operations. So far, we've introduced the variables num, num2, and x. Now, suppose we want to look at a variable called y. If we run this, you're going to see an error come up on the screen. And that's because we haven't actually created a variable called y, and we haven't assigned it any value. So an error that comes up is that the name y is not defined. And this basically means that this variable is not something that we have before. So coming back to the data types that we talked about, both the variables num and x that we've defined have the same data type. And so this is part of that interactivity that I hope you are able to have your workbook up and running. Try to complete this piece of code. Just click into the cell and then you can start typing. So try to look at the data type for the two variables. So what is the data type of num and what is the data type of x? I'll give you a minute or two to do that exercise. And just a quick reminder, we did look at the type of the variables earlier when we first introduced it in the section on data types. So you'll be able to use a built-in Python function called type to actually query that. Great. So I see that some of you have been able to run that code and are popping that into the chat. Thank you so much. And yes, you are indeed correct. So if we look at type of x, first, it shows us that it's an int. And if we look at the type of num, it's also going to show us that it's an int. So this might make you think that perhaps you might think that all numbers are going to be this int or this integer type. So let's try something else. Let's initialize a variable called y. It's going to use that variable num that we introduced before that's an integer. And let's add a decimal value to it. After adding the decimal, we're going to see what the type of that is. And you'll see that the type of y is a float. So this is another type of numeric, another numeric type within Python, and it'll have these decimal values. There's a lot more that you can go into and continue to learn more deeply on variable types, as well as the precision of these variables that the computer can hold. But because this is an introductory session, we're not going to go into those. But there are some excellent resources if you're more interested in learning more. So I mentioned that there's another type that we can look at, and we're going to look at is strings. This is also very relevant because it's one of the best ways that we can interact with users. For example, there will be a lot of data sets that might be sentences, and then we can do a lot of things like text processing, and perhaps we can look at different machine learning applications to text inputs from users. So when we're looking at a string, the way that you write a string, you'll typically enclose it in these double quotations that you see here. So you can name your variables any name that you want. And then the string that I've designed here is banana. So I've designed 3 different variables: fruit, red fruit, and short fruit. And then these are the strings that they point to. If we want to, if we want to look at another built-in function that Python has. It's the length function. And this is basically going to tell you how many characters are in this string. So if I look at this string value, the way that you count your characters, B is character number 1, A is character number 2, N is character number 3, and so on. So as you count through, you're going to get that you have 6 characters in that first variable. If we look at the one of the other strings that we assigned, there's only one character. Some punctuation marks, and I run that. Each of these is going to count as a individual element in the string. And so that's going to change the count. So now the number of the characters in the variable short fruit is 6. So all of your punctuation will count as a separate variable. Your quotations are just there when you define the variable, and they don't count towards your length count because the actual variable object that you're storing is what I've highlighted here. So we've kind of done this exercise as I showed you over here. But if you want, please feel free to go ahead and complete that exercise just so that you can see what it's like to run this built-in function for length. And these are some very basic functions. There's a lot more functionality that Python has, and you can look at string functions that are associated with strings and then query what those look like. Often they'll be very helpful, and we'll see some more examples as we keep moving through. So another built-in function for string data types is this find function. And basically what it's doing is it's looking at your variable. In our case, we're looking at the variable fruit, which we assigned earlier. We're trying to find the first index of the letter or the phrase that we put here, so A. So if we look at fruit, it is banana, and the first index, the first place that we find A is in this element right here. This is also showing another aspect of programming in Python in particular, where the index count starts from 0. So B is index 0, the A is index 1, N is index 2, and so on. So in Python, all of your index counts for things like strings, lists, which we'll see later, all of them start with an index of 0. So suppose we want to look at the other variable that we have, red fruit. And we want to see if there's an A here as well. So if we run that, it's going to give us that output of 0. So the 0th element of red fruit, or the word apple, is an A. Now suppose we have this variable that I've changed the value of, and we want to see if this variable has an A in it. It's going to return -1. And -1 basically means that we don't actually find this term here. Suppose we wanted to look at, rather than just one variable, a string or a substring. And so if we look at a component like this, can we find something with A and A in it? It's going to give you, yes, fruit, which was banana, has that A and A term here, and the index is 1. So it basically means that the phrase or the substring A and A starts at index 1, and then you can continue further down until you see that. So let's do this next exercise here. I want you to define a string, and this is an example of a string that I have. You can define anything you want, whether it's a sentence, it's just a string of different letters put together, and then create a sentence and try to use one of the built-in functions to see if you can get the length of the string that you've defined, and if there's any particular substring within that as well. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that exercise, and then we'll do one here on the screen together. Someone is asking if you're creating the variable in the Colab notebook. Yes, you will be creating it in the Colab notebook. And so right here in the section that I have that says to complete, Sorry, I should have explained this. When you have this pound symbol right before, and the text in green, that's a comment. So that's not a part of the code. It's just a comment that's put in. It doesn't get executed. So in this code cell, I want you to basically create that variable, and then try to use those built-in functions. So right here, you can put that information here. I'll give another couple of seconds, and then we'll do one of those examples just to show you what that would look like on how to complete this exercise. So when you see this gray block, just click into it and then give it any name. Suppose I want to call my variable new variable. To assign, you're going to have that equal to. To create a string, you're going to use these double quotations, for example. And you can create a sentence or a phrase. So today I am teaching at a HerWILL workshop. Okay, so that's the phrase that I've created. We can use some of the different built-in variables, the built-in functions. So if we want to look at the length of that sentence, and you'll see as I'm typing, there are prompts that suggest what I want to be typing. So whether that's a variable name or a function, these are some of the built-in features of Colab, as well as some different IDEs. And those are these different environments where you can be running different programming languages. And they're a nice way to help support you as you're coding. But feel free to use them. And also if you don't feel like using them, that's fine as well. As you get more experience, they'll become a little bit more helpful. So we can look at the length of that sentence. We have 42 elements there. And then if we want to see if we can find a phrase, suppose I want to see if HerWILL is in my sentence. And it's telling me that the element of HerWILL starting would be 25. If I add a space right before, those spaces count towards the length of the sentence of your string, and they also count towards finding that actual phrase. So we'll see that this changes to 24, and that's because this space is at the 24th index. And if I try to find out if this is a question, for example, and we have that question mark, it's going to return -1, and that's because there's no question mark in that phrase altogether. So someone's asking about running the cells. So you're going to have that notebook for yourself. Run those cells in that notebook. So the entire structure that we have there, put that onto your own Colab environment and copy that. You can run it there. You don't have to send any of those results anywhere. This entire workbook is for you to be able to guide you through each of those steps and to get some experience using these different pieces. Okay, so someone asked, you wrote that fruit is equal to banana and you wanted to find AN. You got 1 and why isn't it 2? That's a good question. So let's run this again. And just like you had here, I'm highlighting it. It's 1. And thank you, Carol, for answering that as well. What this is doing is it's trying to find the index of where that phrase starts. So if we go back to what banana looks like as a string, right here, the B is index 0. The A is index 1. It might be easier if I write this. Right, so if you were to imagine the B is index 0, the A is index 1, I forgot a 2, and so on, right? So when you're trying to find this phrase AN, it's going to look for the very first instance of where AN is found. And if we look here, AN is found right there. So it's going to look at 1, 0, and then 1, and it's going to return 1, which is that first index. If you put BAN, that's going to return 0. because now the very first element of the word you're trying to find is in the first index here. And so now you have BAN as the phrase you're looking for. So this is just one of the functions that exist for strings. Okay, we're going to keep going forward, but feel free to return to any of the sections of the workbook as you have the time, and that's going to allow you to continue to play around with all of the different code blocks that we have. So what we did before is we've looked at these data types of the integer and the string. So we're right down here. So if we try to add variables together like we did before, say we come up here and we look at number plus 3 times 2. This was an integer and we do integer operations on that. And so we were able to get a value of 8. You could ask, can we do something similar with strings? And the answer in Python is yes, you can do something similar with strings. So if we try to add together this variable fruit and the variable red fruit, if we run that, what we get is banana apple. So basically what Python is doing is it's taking this add symbol and treating it like a concatenation operator. So when we want to concatenate these two things together, you're basically taking the first string, the second string, and you're just putting them right in together into one string. So what you've returned is a single string that has both of those put together. If we look at the length of that new variable, you're going to see that it's 11. So it's banana plus apple, the length put together would be 11. Now, you could think, what happens if I have an integer and I have a string and I try to add those together? So if I hover over num, we see that the Colab environment is telling us that the variable is of type int, the value is 1. Red fruit is of type string, and the value is apple. So if we run this, what you're going to get is you're going to get an error. It tells you that you have a type error. And basically it means that the operation plus that's defined cannot be used on an integer and a string together. It can be used on 2 integers together, which we've seen. It can be used on an integer and a float, so these numeric types. It can also be used on 2 strings together, but not if the types are different. So if you have this numeric type and a non-numeric type, you won't be able to use it. So that would be the error that you get for the operation on the plus. And so whenever you see some of these are different errors that come with your lines of code, and they slowly help you to figure out what the issue is, and then try to find solutions for that. It'll take a while to understand what some of these errors are. And if you're not sure, you can always just, copy that error, do a quick Google search. Stack Overflow is really helpful in understanding what some of these are. And there's a lot of Python documentation to try and help as you go through some of this debugging process to try to find the bugs and correct your code as well. So we've seen this is probably our second example of where we have this error come up. Okay, so now suppose we have a number that we've written in quotes, and I've kind of given away the answer to this one earlier, but try to see if you can use this number that's written in quotes in a math operation and see what happens. I'll give you another minute or two to fill in that exercise as we go through. And as a hint to those who were here when I shared the strings earlier, we did do something similar here where we added numbers and punctuation marks as well. So go ahead and try to use the variable quoted number in a math operation. So you might do something like this. You might subtract something. You might do a multiplication, which is written by that asterisk. You could do a division, which is going to be that backslash. So try to use that and see what happens. So we have a question in the chat about how the len function is printing itself without the print function. That's a good question. And I see that there has been an answer to that, but in case someone else was also wondering what was happening here, basically what's happening is you have some function that will return a value. So when you have this len function, it's returning a value. If I just have this statement, then that's going to print out that return value in the Jupyter Notebook. If you have this in a traditional Python script and it's running, it's not going to print, but in the Jupyter Notebook environment, it will. What's different is if I assign this to a variable, then that is not going to print. And that's because the return value of this function has been saved to this variable length of string. So if I want to see what that looks like, then we have to print that out yourself, and then you'll see it there. So these are some of the ways that the Colab is and similar Jupyter Notebook environments are very helpful, is that there are some of these things that allow you to query what's happening in your code very quickly as well. Okay, so let's come back to this exercise where we were trying to use this quoted number. And let's say I want to subtract 2 from it. You should be getting, you should be getting a type error again, because the quoted num is a string type, and the operation you're trying to do is a math operation. I did see that someone had the multiplication example, and so what they got was 44. And let me explain this, because that can be a little confusing. So let me take away the assignment so we see that printout. So what's printing out is 44, and basically what this operation is doing on the string quoted num, it's just repeating it and doing a concatenation. So that what you see here as quoted num times 2 is actually the same as doing this, which we've seen before as being a concatenation operation. And so that might be one of those places where, depending on what you do, it may or may not work. But this multiplication, it's not actually giving you the number 4 multiplied by 2. It's giving you the string that's been repeated and then concatenated together. So that's a good example to put that into the chat. I see there was a question related to that. I hope this answers what that was. Yes, the quoted number is treated as a string, and you will not be able to do an operation with it written as a string. So I see that some of you have jumped ahead and started saying, okay, well, if I have this number that's written in quotes, how do I actually use it in a math operation? And what you can do is you can convert the data type. And I've done that right here as the example. So when you look at this, this is another built-in function, and it's actually taking the type of quoted num and turning it into an int. So quoted num was the string of 4. It's now been converted into an integer. And if you run that, it shows that it's 4. And this shows you the numeric type, whereas here, this was a string type. You can see the quotations around it. So in this exercise, try to define a variable, assign it as a string the way you've done it here, and then turn that into an integer and then use that in a math operation. You can play with different types of math operations and see what happens. Feel free to try using a decimal. If you do use a decimal, then you're going to want to convert it to a float, not an int. But you can try some of those things as well. Someone's asking if it's necessary to know math in order to understand this workshop. You don't need to know math. Often we do a lot of math in programming just because programming helps us to run, complex computations. I'm going to be doing only the simple operators of plus and minus, very simple things. There will be a little bit more that I'll talk about in the visualization intro to AI ML, and that's only for the transition into the second workshop on AI and ML, so you see what's happening in the background. But in order to get started with programming, you don't need to know math, in a complex way beyond what I'm sure all of you already know. It's just, these are some nice examples and ways to understand and have these simple operations in a programming way. So you could do an entire exercise that's only looking at strings. However, it's also nice to be able to look at those integer types as well. Okay, so in this exercise, suppose we have a variable. It's called sport. I'm assigning it this value badminton. And I say the jersey number is 3. Okay, so this, I've assigned this as a string. I've also assigned this as a string. If I want to do some operation with jersey number, then we want to change that into an integer. Again, if that was a decimal, you might want to do a float. And then suppose we want to add the number 10, that'll give us 13. And so that allows us to, this data type conversion basically allows us to go between strings and numbers and different data types. There are multiple different benefits of this, and you'll see this more as you kind of go deeper into programming. One quick example that I can give you is if you're taking an input from the user. So if you ask the user to put in a sentence, and they put in a sentence that might have some numbers in it, and you need to find that number, and then you need to do some operation on the number. And that might be where you want to convert it into a numeric type, and then be able to send something back in string form. So thank you for the question about having the data type being converted, and then why you can't use it in the way that you have, Mustafa. And thank you for the response as well. This is correct. So when I do this operation, it's a temporary conversion, as our participant has mentioned in the code, in the comments, pardon me. So I haven't assigned this data type, this new variable with the data type integer, to another variable. So if I do want to assign it, if I say jersey number is equal to the integer of jersey number, now the type of jersey number is going to be an int. So let's see this. Sorry. With the zoom controls, it's so. When we first assign jersey number, the type of jersey number is a string. Now, I've converted it into an integer. And now if I wanted to see the type of jersey number, so the code operates sequentially. If I want to look at the type of jersey number, it's now an integer. So if here, I wanted to use this in an operation, that will give you an error, a type error, because it's a string, not an integer. If I do it here, that'll actually give us the answer of 6, and that's because you've converted this into an integer by doing this assignment right here, and now you can use the math operations on it. So thank you to all our participants who are answering questions in the chat as well. Okay, so the next thing I want to move into is these if-else statements, and it's just exactly how it sounds. You check if a condition is met. If that condition is met, then you're going to do some action. Otherwise, you're going to do a different action. And so we can look at an example over here. So we're coming back to our numbers examples just because that's a little bit easier. And we're looking at that variable that we initialized before. If we hover over, it tells you the value of that is 1. And you'll read the code sequentially. So if the variable num is greater than 10, we want to print this out. If it's not greater than 10, so else, and in the Python notation, else if is noted as elif. If the number is greater than 0, you print the number is too small. Else, you print the number is negative. And so if we run that code, num is equal to 1, which isn't greater than 10, we move to the next statement. It is greater than 1, so we print out this statement, and then we exit. If we give another example where, suppose we say num is equal to 20, and we run this code again, what do you think the result is going to be? So you can feel free to just kind of think about it, pop it into the chat, and then you can run through this yourself as well. Num is 20. Num is greater than 10. Yes, So it should print the number is too large, and then it'll stop. So if we run that, that's what you're going to get. The number is large enough. So the number is large enough. It printed that statement. If we change this to -5, so this is something that's not going to meet the condition of being greater than 10. It doesn't meet the condition of being greater than 0. So it'll come and it'll print out over here. And if we run that, we see the final result, the number is negative. Whenever we come to if-else statements, as soon as it satisfies one of those conditions, it's going to stop executing through the rest of the block. And so this is a if-else code block. Once this condition is met, it'll print this out and it'll stop. And it'll immediately go to the very end, in which case, in our code block, we don't have anything else. And so you won't execute any other piece. You can look at similar examples with strings. Thank you, everyone, for giving your answers. So if we look at an example with a string, and I've actually already run this. So you can do if-else statements with strings and non-numeric types as well. Here I'm trying to see if it has a particular word. So remember, when the find function finds whether the phrase or a letter exists within the sentence, it's going to return something greater than 0. It'll return the index. So it has to be a non-negative number. So in this case, I have a sentence called I have a cat. We're trying to see if cat is in that sentence. If it is, we print add to the grocery list cat treats. Otherwise, we're just going to say ask the user for more information. So if I say I have a bird and I run that, it's going to say ask the user for more information about their pet. And it doesn't really care about where in the sentence you have anything. So if I run something like cat, 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 it will say to add to the grocery list. And if you say something like I do not have a cat, because what you've written in your condition is just to see if the user's sentence has the word cat in it, it's still going to tell you to add to the grocery list. So to be able to look at these like negative statements and do some more here, you would have to have, in your decision logic, you would have to have more information embedded. And so you could think of many different ways of doing that. You could parse the sentence in different ways, but we're not going to go into some more details. We just want to explain some of these concepts. So that would be the if-else statement. Now, a lot of you mentioned the errors that you were getting, and if-else statements are actually really good for figuring out if you have errors in your code and giving an alternative so that you don't see an error come up and stop the execution of your code like this. So that's what we're going to show next. And I'm going to run that code block and then walk us through what that looks like. So in an if-else statement, what you have here is we've given it a number within these quotation marks, the number 4 in quotation marks. So we're going to check the type of the variable. If the type of the variable is an integer, and Python's really nice because it often reads just like a normal sentence would in English. So if type of given variable is int, we're saying the variable is given variable. Otherwise, we want to convert it. And here I've added a little comment where we're saying we're parsing or we're converting the data type of given variable into an integer. Then you can use the result. You can use that to calculate your result here. So we're going to multiply that by 2 and add 10. And then we're going to print our result out. So this is a way that you can make your code more robust to different data types. And this is very commonly done in code. So you'll see a lot of these. There are more complex ways of catching errors in your code. And so you could have these error statements, and we won't go into those right now. But they do exist, and they'll allow you to print out error statements and stop stop when your code makes an error and things like that as well. So there was a question on what does greater than equal to mean. And I'm just going to give that answer out to the rest of the class. Thank you for those who are answering in the chat as well. Sorry that I did not answer that. Basically, it's trying to say that if the result of this is greater than or equal to 0, then you're going to print this out. That statement's going to be met. So you have these different kind of conditionals, and there's a couple of them that let me walk you through some of those. If you do just greater than, and your user input is cat, if you remember our find function, that's the user input dot find is going to return 0. And that means that your phrase starts with cat. In this case, you're going to not satisfy this constraint because this is a greater than, not greater than, equal to. And you're actually going to ask the user for more information. So that's exactly what you get. So we have greater than equal to is the example we had before. You could imagine that you have less than equal to as another conditional. And then you could say whether it is equal to. And for that, the notation in Python is a double equal sign. So if you remember here, when you have a single equal sign, that's used in order to assign value. If you have a double equal sign, it's going to be trying to see if that condition holds. And so if you look here, it is going to return 0 when you do user input.find cat. And then it's going to print out add to grocery list cat treats. Okay, so we've looked at variables, we've looked briefly at data types and strings, and we've looked at if-else statements. The last big piece that I want to introduce is lists and for loops, and then we're going to do an activity. If we have a little bit more time at the end of that activity, we can go through the part 2 and part 3. And if we don't, those are available to you so you can read those on your own. They are more advanced than a beginner who has not seen Python before. But it would be nice. They're nice pieces there to help show you how you can visualize data, and that's scikit-learn library. And we can make time at the beginning of the next workshop to actually go through those if we have some time for that. So don't worry about that. Okay, so let's move on to the next part, which is the lists and the for loops. So we're going to look at first lists and then the for loops. A list is another type of, it's another data type. So we've looked at integers, we've looked at strings, and the list is another data type. And it's written like this. Here I have a list of numbers. And so I have a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 numbers. They're separated by commas, and they're encapsulated by these brackets, these square brackets. So when you have a list, you have to remember that we're going to be using square brackets to describe it. So my variable is called list of numbers, and then this is what, this is how I assign what that looks like. So I'm going to briefly comment that out and give another example. So suppose I want to create another list, list 2. I'm going to start with those square brackets, and perhaps my numbers are 4, 8, 12, 16. Okay. The spaces in this case are just for visualization. So when you're reading the code, it's a little bit easier to read one way than the other. And these commas that you see are separating those values from one another. So list 2 has these 4 elements. And then list of numbers has these 5 elements. So to show you what this list looks like visually, you can definitely print it out. And it's going to print out very similarly to what you see on the screen. Now, to introduce other ways of printing the list, I'm also going to introduce for loops. And this is where lists and for loops come together quite well. If you have a list of numbers and you want to look at every single element of your list individually, you can iterate through the list. One way to do that is by using a for loop. So we're going to write our for loop like this. We say for in Python, whatever variable name, this is going to be something you could call this, you could call this X if you wanted to, for X in, for number in, for element in. So this doesn't matter. This variable is only going to be used within the scope of your for loop. And the for loop has these indentations. So we're going to say for every element in our variable, which is list of numbers, we want to print out what that variable is. And if we print that out, we will see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We see list 2 printed above from that print statement, and then every element comes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, if we wanted to do some math operation, we can say we want to print the value of element plus 5. And what it's going to do is it's going to add 5 to every single one of these when it's printing it out. So 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Similarly to what we saw before in terms of the assignments of the data type conversion, if we print out list of numbers, which we added 5 to each of those elements when we did that original print statement, if we print list of numbers here, it hasn't changed. And that's because within the for loop, we haven't made any changes to that variable list of numbers. We've just looked at every single one of those elements, used the element in this print statement, but we haven't changed it. So if we give another example, if we say element is equal to element plus 5, and we print element, it does not change what list of numbers looks like. Element is only used within that for loop, and it hasn't made any changes to list of numbers. If we did want to make changes to list of numbers, then we would want to say list of numbers and actually index that element here, plus 5. But you wouldn't want to index through all of those elements. You'd also want to look at the index of the element. Okay, so let me show you what I've done here. The list of numbers, when we first wrote that for loop, let me copy that for you so we can see each of those components. When we first wrote it, we wrote this function like this, and let's get rid of this for now. We looked at every element in list of numbers. Element, the variable, is only valid within the scope of our for loop, so in these statements, and the value of element changes every time. So we say for element in list of numbers, first element is equal to 1. We carry out this operation, we carry out the print statement, and then we return back here. Now element is equal to 2. It advances to the next item in our list. If we also want the index, so index 0, index 1, index 2, we're going to use a function called enumerate. And enumerate basically gives us an object that says the index and the item of the list. So the index and the item in the list. This way, we can actually make changes to the original list as well, instead of just getting that information directly. So we can say list of numbers at this particular index. And so in Python, we will use these square brackets in order to identify which of these indices we're looking at. Is equal to the value at that list plus 5. So the value in the list at that index is the same as element. And we can see that this is true if we do this. So here we're assigning element is equal to element plus 5. We'll print that out. We'll do the same operation on the list itself at that same index. And then so when we print this and we print this, we'll get the same results. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to comment these out just so that we're only seeing things one piece at a time. So when we run the for loop, we say element is equal to element plus 5, and we print that out. And then we make the same change on the list, and we print that out. And so you'll see 6 printed twice, then 7 printed twice, 8 printed twice, and so on. I'm going to get rid of these print statements just so that there isn't too much on the display. And now we want to print what list of numbers looks like. So if we run that, we see that we've actually made changes to the actual list. We haven't just made changes to the element within that list. So if we compare what this looks like, in this for loop, we've made changes to only the value that we've extracted within the for loop. So list of numbers will not look any different. it's equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here in this for loop, we do make changes to list of numbers directly. We assign it with new values. And so we'll see that reflected outside of the for loop as well. So that was a bit of a deeper dive into the for loop. And I want to give a couple of minutes just so that we can take a look at another example, and then we'll put it all together into an activity. So let me briefly check the chat, see if everything is okay. Someone asked, why is the word number used? Can num be used? Yes, you can use any word in that when you're enumerating through the list and looking at all of those items. Those aren't like the exact word that you use doesn't matter within the code as long as you're not using keywords within Python. Why is index not treated as the element? And so here, I hope this answered your question when we went through the enumerate example, where this gives you the index of each of those elements, and this is the actual element value. And the reason it's coming like this is because we're using this enumerate tool. When we use enumerate, this function is returning 2 values. All of the functions we've looked at so far only returned 1 value. So when we looked at, for example, the length function or type, when we look at type of 5, this function is only returning 1 value. Enumerate is returning 2 values. And those 2 values are 1, the index, and 2, the element. And so if we look at the documentation, for example, if we look at the documentation within Python for this, it's saying you want to put in an iterable. In our case, it's a list. So we're enumerating over a list, and it's returning 2 values. So it's returning both the index as well as the actual item as well. So this is, you can dig into kind of the Python documentation as well as some other websites that can provide a little bit extra support in terms of looking at what those exact functions are doing, what their inputs and their outputs are. There's the question of why did we use enumerate? We used enumerate so we could have access to both of those pieces of information, the index as well as the element in the list. Okay. I hope that answers those questions. We are at 12:40. I'll stay back a little bit longer. I did have, because we did start this workshop late and I do really want to get through this section. So we're going to keep going at least to the end of part 1. And then we can follow up about some of the other sections later. So this is another example of the for loop. Because we looked at it in quite a lot of detail above, I'm going to skip over this section. But please go and follow through and see if you can understand each of those lines of code. To briefly explain what's happening, we had this variable list of numbers, and I'm going to initialize it again here. So list of numbers. And we have another variable we've initialized called x. Basically, what we're doing is we're looking at every single element in list of numbers, and we're making changes in the variable x based on the number. So here, what I've shown here is this operator minus equals. This is short form for x is equal to x minus. This is specific only to Python. So very few other programming languages will allow you to do this. It's just a short form. You could very easily write this as x minus. So I just wanted to introduce that short form. And so let me put that into here instead. So we're taking x, we're subtracting number from x, and the number is each of the elements in the list of numbers. We can print out all the intermediate values, and then you'll see at the very end, we've made changes to that variable x through this for loop. So it's a similar exercise to what we did up here, but we're just looking at another variable as well. We can also do another example. Here, where we're combining the for loops and the if and the else statements. And you'll see that the indentation level increases every time. So at that first level of indentation, it shows you that this entire code block is happening within the for loop. And this indentation level is happening only if this if statement is met. And so you'll see that the code is very clearly structured with these indents. We're going to go through every single number in list of numbers. We're trying to see if the number y we've assigned here is greater than 90. So if you remember, we looked at these greater than, equal to, less than operators, for example. If it's not, we're going to subtract something. Otherwise, we're going to add something. So this code block is basically putting together the pieces that we had before. So what I want you to do, perhaps not now, just because I want to get to that next section, is try to actually walk through every single line of that code and see if you can find the value of the variable y in the code block before you run it yourself. So try to walk through and see if you can follow how the for loop is running and how those if and else statements are running. You can basically say, okay, the first number in my list of numbers is equal to 1. Now I come here to the sentence. Y is equal to 100. Is 100 greater than 90? Yes. So now I want to subtract number from y. Number was equal to 1. Y minus 1 is 99. Now I'm going to go to the next number. Number is now equal to 2. Y is now equal to 99. Is it greater than 90? Yes. Move forward and basically go through that loop. Once you do that 1 or 2 times, it'll be much easier for you to understand how the code is running. And it'll be easier for you to create your own for loops and if-else statements in the future. So go ahead and do that, and then you can actually check what that value of that variable is. We've talked a little bit about scope already. So one of the things I want to mention here is that when you assign a variable within this for loop and it's called number, that variable only exists within the for loop. So it only exists within this for loop block. If you try to access it outside of the for loop, so away from that indentation level, like if I try to do something, number plus something, then it doesn't exist in that space. And so you should get an error there. Now, one thing I will note is I've made a lot of changes through the code. And so if I've already initialized number as a variable, you might not get that error. So maybe try changing, try another example with a different name for that variable here, and then try to access it outside of the for loop. So what I want to do as the last piece is basically just look at this activity that to try and put together all of these pieces in part 1, and then briefly introduce functions. I'm going to do it in the opposite order. I'm going to introduce functions first, given the time, and then have you do that activity as a take home, as well as going through parts 2 and 3 of this workbook. So if we look at a function, and feel free to read all of this after in the order that it's written. If we look at what a function is basically just executing a single block of code in a way where you can call that function to execute that piece of code again. So in the syntax of Python, we're going to define a function using this term def. This is the name of the function that's been highlighted in golden. So here I'm calling my function add5. You can call it whatever name you want. The inputs of the function are written within these these typical parentheses. And so x is going to be an input to the function add5. We use it inside our function. So we've started our function with the colon, it's been indented, right? We use the input, and then we want to return some value. I'm going to write this more explicitly. Y is equal to x plus 5, and then we're returning the value y. So I haven't changed what the function is doing. I'm just writing it out a little bit more explicitly. So I've defined my function. If you see here, we haven't actually done anything with this function. We've just defined it, but we can use it in the future. So here, if I want to say y is equal to add5 8, this is the new variable I'm creating, and I'm assigning it the value of the output of the function add5, and I'm calling the function that we just defined above with the input value 8. So if I look at add5, the input is x plus 5. So the input that I gave was 8. What is 8 plus 5? It's 13. Suppose I want to call this function again, add 5, 100. 100 plus 5 is equal to 105. So I've defined the function before, and now I'm calling the function. All of the things that we're doing with length, find, all of those are built-in Python functions. That means you don't have to create these definitions on your own. You already use what already exists. And this is where packages are really nice, because packages will contain a lot of these functions that you can use. There's a lot of numerical functions that you can use, visualizations, which is part 2, and then a lot of AI ML techniques that are already built into functions. So for example, if you want to design a neural network, there are functions that allow you to do that, so you don't have to do everything from scratch. So that in this case, it basically adds like a wrapper around the work that's done here. You can do the same thing with strings. So the input to your function can really be anything. You can have multiple inputs. So suppose I want to add, I want to define a new function, and I want to add return z. I define z is equal to x plus y. So my function is going to add numbers together. If I want to see what the sum of 5 plus 6 is, we run it, and we're going to print that variable, and it's going to print 11. That's the sum of 5 and 6. You can also call the function directly, so you don't have to assign it into another variable. You can say add numbers 2, 3, and 2 together. It gives you 5. And so you can have as many inputs as you want. The inputs to your functions don't have to be the same type, so you can take in, for example, strings and integers in the lists in the same function, and that allows you to build more complexity in as well. So if we go to our example with sentences, here I've defined 2 different functions. So the first is question, and the second is has word. And so we want to see whether the sentence that has been given to us in this function is a sentence or not. We're going to check if there is a question mark in the sentence. This is similar to using the find operator, but it's a much cleaner way of doing it in Python. We would have seen this written as if sentence dot find greater than equal to 0. So what I've written here and here is equivalent in Python, which is really nice because this reads almost like you're speaking. And so this is going to return true if there's a question mark in that sentence, otherwise it returns false. And then here we're checking with 2 inputs whether a particular sentence has a particular word. So let's run this. Once you've run it, these 2 functions have been defined and you can use those functions. And I'm going to have you complete those exercises on actually calling those functions. This is very related to the activity that we unfortunately didn't have time for, which is this piece. So if you kind of go ahead and do this, I would recommend doing this activity first and make this an assignment out of this workshop. Do this activity first, and then come through into that functions list and basically do these pieces again. Because it's going to be quite similar in activity. It's just doing it in a more modular way by introducing functions rather than just writing all of the code out. So let me check the chat and see how everything is going. Yes, thank you. So we are at 12:50. My original plan was that we would start the workshop right at 11, which would have given us enough time to actually go through parts 2 and 3. Unfortunately, I am not able to stay any longer, but I do have parts 2 and 3, which are visualizations and introduction to AI ML within the workbook. We can discuss offline with the HerWILL team to see if there's any other, if there's a little bit of time at the beginning of workshop 2 in order to go through these sections. Otherwise, part 2 and 3 are really leveraging existing packages. So it'll walk you through importing different packages that exist in Python. This is a random number package. NumPy is a numerics package. It gives you a lot of different tools that you can use in order to do different mathematical operations and things like that. This is a little bit more advanced. So everything that is in part 1 is the foundation, and part 2 builds upon all of that in order to generate plots. I can show you what those outputs look like just quickly, just so you can see what Python is capable of. So there's a lot of different plotting tools that are available. For example, here we generated different random numbers. We generated 8 random numbers, and now we plotted them as a scatter plot. So we can actually generate this plot in code. One of the nice things about Colab, and I'm going to skip through these next sections, but there's a lot more that you can do in these. One of the nice things about Colab that I wanted to share with you all is that it does help you generate plots as well. So I'm skipping ahead, for which I do apologize, but I do want to share this functionality because it's very interesting and it might be helpful as you're learning how to develop graphics and diagrams. So let's see. I'm just going to run these pieces of code. And essentially what I've done is I've imported a data set that exists in the scikit-learn library. And that data set looks at these 3 different flower types. And the idea is basically if I give you information about the petals and the sepals and the length and width of these petals and sepals, can you identify which of these 3 types of flowers it is? And I do have links in this tutorial that you can go through that'll hopefully provide you with a little bit more information. So once I've imported the data, something that Colab allows you to do is it has this link here which says view recommended plots. And if you click that, it's actually looking at this table of data and generating multiple different plots of that data for you itself. And this is a really nice tool because when you're a beginner, it can be difficult to know how to generate plots and what data sets look like. And this helps to bridge some of those gaps. So for example, if I look at this particular plot here, if I click it, it's actually giving me the entire figure. It's showing me those 3 different types of flowers, and it's plotting one of the values, so one of the lengths of the petals that we have for each of those 3 flowers, and it's plotting the distribution of the petal length that we have in this data set. If you want to see what the code that was used to generate it is, you can click show code and it gives you all of that code. So this is a really nice way to be interactive and to learn some of these new tools and these new libraries. So I am sorry that we didn't have all of the time to go through parts 2 and 3. I do hope that part 1 was very helpful and it gives you some of the tools that you can use to keep learning more about Python and other programming languages. Hopefully it was a way to get some foundations and to hopefully you're excited about moving forward and learning some more and looking at some of these different pieces of Colab as well as Python. And just quickly, the next workshop will be on AI basics and advanced text processing. And we'll see if we can find a couple minutes in the beginning just to do a little bit of review as well. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And then we're going to hand it back to the HerWILL coordinators.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Rabab. Am I audible to everyone? Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. So it was such a very enriching workshop, and I hope that the participants got to learn a lot about Python essentials. And this is only the beginning because it is not possible for anybody who is just beginning to learn Python can, grasp everything in one workshop session. So as you all have access to our Google Classroom now, so we would encourage you to keep on practicing what Rabab has very graciously taken her time out of her busy schedule and taught all of you. Having said that, I would just like to announce and mention that our next workshop is going to happen on the 14th of October, and it is going to be on AI basics and advanced text processing with Python. And the timing for the workshop is at 12 p.m. EST, and it is Bangladesh time 10 p.m. And if I am not wrong, Syrian and Egyptian time, it is 7 p.m. So please note that down. And a couple of other announcements that I want to make is that, especially for Syrian and Egyptian participants, we have a lot of emails that got bounced. So if you have any other email address that you want to share with us, you can email to us, and we will communicate with all of you in those emails, because once the emails are bounced, it is difficult for us to keep on sending the notifications, because we have a lot of participants and we have been continuously back and forth communicating with everybody so that everybody can join and actually experience the hands-on learning that we are trying to provide. So again, just saying that the next workshop is on 14th October, 12 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Syria and Egyptian time, and 10 p.m. Bangladesh time. And having said that, I would like everyone to get familiar with the Google Classroom, get familiar with Google Colab, because these are going to be very helpful for you. And these are the things that you will be needing to complete the workshop series, basically. And also regarding the attendance/feedback form, please fill out the form if you haven't yet, because if you do not complete 4 of the workshop series, unfortunately, you will not be eligible for gaining your certificate. So that's about it. Thank you so much, everyone, for being on time and being before time. That showed how interested you were for the workshops and everything. See you guys on the 14th. Thank you once again. And thank you so much, Dr. Rabab, for giving us your time.
Thank you all. I hope you enjoyed.
Appreciate you, Dr. Rabab Haider. You've done such an amazing job. I'm sure everybody learned so much, and I would encourage everyone to use the couple of days that we have before our next workshop to go back and practice some more, so that we get better at this. But yes, it was amazing. Just heartwarming. Our hearts are so full that for the first time ever, we have Syrian, Egyptian, Lebanese, and Pakistani participants, and also going toward the community that we've always hoped to build. So thank you all.
I wanted to add one last thing. This is something that I always forget, and our team keeps on reminding me. Can we all come on camera and just pose a little bit of this and that and do this just for so that we can take a screenshot. So yes, Mukatsa, go ahead. I'm so sorry I missed out on saying this.
So just like stay in that position for a while, because I'll be taking different screenshots. So give me a minute. And smiles. Thank you guys. It's done. Thank you.
Appreciate you, Mukatsa. Thank you.
Thank you, HerWILL.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.